Are we ready? Good morning, everyone. I just learned a really fun fact that the Carter Center is actually 69% female. So the mantle that we have this morning is really unusual. We're all in for a big treat. So welcome to our June meeting of the Carter Center Board of Councilors. I'm Mary Moore, chair of the BOC. We're very happy to have many guests with us today, both here in the Cecil B. Day Chapel and joining us via our webcast. In a moment, we'll welcome the newest members of the Board of Councilors, but first, as always, we welcome the members of our Atlanta diplomatic community. As I introduce you, please stand, and audience, let's hold our applause until the introductions are complete. First, Consul General of Switzerland, Peter Zimmerli. Consul General of Belgium, Michael Garabetsov. And Consul of Canada, Kirk Duguid. Have I missed any Consuls General? Carter Center Board of Trustees Chair Jason Carter recently sent new member invitations, and I'm happy to introduce several people who have accepted to serve as new members of the Board of Councilors. If you're a new member in the Day Chapel, please stand when I call your name and remain standing, and we'll give a group applause at the end. First, Ann Fort, partner, Evershed. Grace Fricks, founder, Access to Capital for Entrepreneurs, ACE. Ellen Marks, consultant and retired managing director, Probst Mills, co-founder, New Rural Project. And Sanjay Parekh, entrepreneur and co-founder, Occasional Raps and Edgewood Media. Welcome to our new members. And so that we may introduce ourselves, let me ask all BOC members to stand. I want to welcome one group among our guests today and ask them to stand. From several Atlanta Area Lions Club, including President Atlanta Lions Club, Dennis Rogers. Welcome, Lions. We have many more guests with us today. All of their names appear in your meeting packet. And let me now ask all of our guests to stand and be welcomed. I'd like to introduce from the Carter Center, and I'll ask to stand, CEO of the Carter Center, Paige Alexander. I have only one board business item. Let me draw your attention to our schedule in the BOC meetings for 2022, which is in your packet, and particularly our next meeting, Friday, September 16th. At this annual meeting of the Board of Councilors, we will be celebrating our 35th anniversary, and we will invite all former BOC members, as well as spouses, colleagues, and other guests to join. On our agenda today, Adam Weiss, director of the Guinea Worm Eradication Program, will report on the Guinea Worm Summit recently held in Abu Dhabi. Then Jonathan Stonestreet, Associate Director of the Democracy Program, will tell us of the recent elections in the Philippines. Michael Johnson, Senior Program Associate of the Conflict Resolution Program, will give an update on Mali, where the Carter Center serves as independent observer to the 2018 Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation. And Dr. Kashef Ijaz, Vice President for Health, will report on the 32nd meeting of the International Task Force for Disease Eradication. In the final portion of our program, Paige Alexander will give remarks and moderate questions from members and guests. All right, for our first speaker. Adam Weiss joined the Carter Center in 2005 as a technical advisor to national in Ghana and Ethiopia. Mr. Weiss took on additional responsibilities over the years and in 2018 was named Director of the Guinea Worm Eradication Program. Since 1986, the Carter Center has led the international campaign to eradicate guinea worm disease. He works closely with ministries of health and local communities, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and many others in this mission. Prior to joining the Carter Center, Mr. Weiss was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana, where he focused on access to clean water, AIDS awareness, and community-based health education. He also assisted in the effort to eradicate guinea worm disease. He earned his bachelor's degree from Ripon College in Wisconsin and his master's of public health from the Rollins School at Emory University. Adam?
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, everyone. It's certainly a real pleasure to be here with you today, including those that are joining us online. Nearly 20 years ago, I was voluntarily plucked from the middle of Wisconsin to northern Ghana to serve in the United States Peace Corps. I knew a little bit about Ghana, but even less about guinea worm disease. However, I quickly saw how devastating that guinea worm was, and that it really did need to be targeted for eradication. It was heart-wrenching to see there were more than 100 people in the village I was assigned to down with guinea worm. They couldn't take care of their families, they couldn't go to school. But I was actually really amazed by the strong community-based structures that the Carter Center had been supporting, led by community-based volunteers. The work was certainly hard, but after a year, the team, and more importantly, the community, saw the significant reductions in cases based on their work. And more to the point, the following year after that, they reached 0 cases. I reason that there were 4 key ingredients to the success. First, you must start by building ground up, listening and learning from those you intend to assist. Second, you must invest in relationships and build trust by being your authentic self and doing exactly what you say you're going to do. Third, you must implement interventions such as surveillance, water source treatments with extreme precision, because any mistake means that people in the following year are going to be down with guinea worm. Fourth, the government and leadership structures really need to be engaged and empowered. The ownership of the programs is not with any of us here in Atlanta, but rather with the community members themselves and the local government leadership that represents them. And that includes community chiefs and elders, all the way up to ministers of health and heads of state. As many of you know, the world is now closer than ever to eradicating guinea worm. Unfortunately, the path has been a little bit longer than we anticipated, but the program reductions over the last 2 years give us confidence that we're moving in the right direction. More than 80 million cases have been prevented since 1986, when President Carter indicated the Carter Center would take the lead on the eradication effort. And last year, there were only 15 people with guinea worm disease. Just 15 out of 8 billion people on the planet. I think that's a pretty amazing accomplishment in and of itself. Reaching that just 15 really resonated with one of our partners in the United Arab Emirates, and they penned a poem along with a video. I know some of you may have seen it, but if you haven't, I would like to play that now for everyone, so we'll air the Just 15 video.
Oh my, how far today we've come. Through war, through gore, through all that's glum. Through the crippling chorus of the doubters' drums that bang on loud that it can't be done. 3,500,000 was the starting sum, whilst endless and traceless cases overrun. Neglected, the infected had no one. See, much bigger battles had to first be won. And so its reign of terror raged, this fiery serpent from an ancient age, inflicting pain with disdain it waged, its war on the poor it played. It cared not for gender, age, or creed. At the water holes it poured its seed and sprung, its trapping when thirst ushered those in need. Again, the cycle of woe begun. It ravaged and bore through limbs and dreams, through the farmers' farms that yielded none, through the strained regimes, through poverty's schemes, through the children's screams, even the soldiers' guns. Meanwhile, on shores a world away, the president's men pinned themselves a feat to slay the serpent come what may, so they built a team to complete the deed. The task seemed simple: make the waters clean, educate, engage, channel change through song, give the masses classes, no need for vaccines, just some local warriors with the will that's strong. And as the cause rang true, more joined the fray, donors to fund the fight, partners with roles to play, doctors to bring relief, leaders to lead the way, experts with expertise, the tables turned that day. Together fight disease, together wage some peace, together inspire hope, together bring reprieve, together cure this ill and this parasite beast. Hand in hand, together we achieve. It's been 40 years, all of them toil bar none. A pipe dream at first facing 3 million ones. Now it's just 15 cases, just 15. Thanks to warriors with filter pipes rebuilding dreams. Now it's just 15, I mean it's just 15. 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, none. It's just 15.
It's clear that this is an intense collaboration, and although I've seen that video more than a dozen times, it still gives me goosebumps. And I know it really reflects the hard work of the teams, but the vision that not only President Carter, but others had to really see this through and reach the last mile. As we get closer to zero, we have to accept that we're starting to become a victim of our own success, because the risk of getting guinea worm is so low. There's just 15 cases. And so it can be difficult to encourage and motivate and inspire people to continue to take the behavior change actions required to prevent it. So this really requires the program to engage and empower leadership structures, as I mentioned. And given the ongoing pandemic, I knew and our team knew that we needed to re-engage countries by gathering all of the guinea worm warriors in person. And to do so, we needed to act swiftly and strike at any opportunity. So that opportunity became clear late last year. And by March of this year, the Carter Center, with Reaching the Last Mile, an initiative of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, joined forces to host a guinea worm summit in the United Arab Emirates. This purposefully country-centered, focused meeting brought together ministers of health, ambassadors, national guinea worm eradication coordinators, the Director General of the World Health Organization, our own Jason Carter, Paige Alexander, Kasha Fajaz, donors and partners. Albeit a major challenge to organize such an in-person summit during the pandemic and overseas, everyone showed up eager to discuss accelerating the endgame strategy. We held bilateral meetings with the 6 endemic countries, with guinea worm, and the 2 that are planned to be certified very soon. We held closed-door meetings to share testimonials about each of the countries' experience and to discuss a declaration calling on each of the countries to renew and strengthen their commitment. The teams also held numerous media engagements, including a panel discussion with the Crown Prince Court, World Health Organization, State Minister of Health from Ethiopia, the Global Institute for Disease Elimination, and of course, the Carter Center. The finale of the summit was the signing of the Abu Dhabi Declaration, which poignantly states each country's commitment to exercise their authority by not allowing guinea worm to afflict their people any. The Carter Center and staff of the Crown Prince Court were invited to meet with the Crown Prince, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, at his palace. This was in the video earlier, but you may recall that President and Mrs. Carter forged a strong relationship with the founder of the UAE, the Crown Prince's father, the late Sheikh Zayed, more than 30 years ago. A partnership that immediately sought to address many neglected tropical diseases, long before we even called them neglected tropical diseases. A highlight may well have been Henry Carter, who's age 15, and was a welcome addition to the summit delegation. But as you can see, he did upstage his father a little bit, Jason Carter, and had this picture put on the front page of a national UAE newspaper. Congratulations, Henry. In true Carter Center style, this was not just a meeting to meet for any particular reason, but rather it was a summit that was a truly force-multiplying event and has resulted in countries issuing needed directives across their governments, ministerial visits to endemic communities, renewed calls for the provision of safe water, and inspired a donor to make a multi-million-dollar commitment to the guinea worm program. In less than 2.5 months, we've seen measurable impact already, and surely there's more to come. Following the summit, Jason Carter and Dr. Tedros, the Director General, co-authored an op-ed about the summit to elevate the eradication effort, which is available on our website. Since we know audiovisuals are always the best way to capture such an event, I will just play a short video that gives you some highlights and maybe will make you feel like you were there with us during the summit, if we can play that video now.
We are on the verge of eradicating the second human disease.
Call on all donors and partners to continue your support in providing the resources to eradicate guinea worm disease and to build a healthier, safer, fairer future for all of us.
UAE has been an unwavering partner in the fight against guinea worm disease. A world without this disease is finally within our reach.
Maybe it's just the great selection of music, but it is very inspiring to all of us, those that were there and those that were not there. But in closing, I'd like to recognize everyone that made the Guinea Worm Summit possible and also successful. It was a full team undertaking across all programs, departments, country offices, and of course, despite the myriad challenges, the event showcased our shared commitment and passion for the mission, and how, when we work together, we can achieve anything. The collective effort further enshrined the Carter Center's relationship with each of the countries and the United Arab Emirates to help rid the world of diseases that no longer need to persist on this earth. So thank you very much for your time this morning and for supporting the Carter Center's work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Incredible videos, too. And go Henry. Isn't it inspiring to see this young generation so involved already? It's great. Our next speaker, Jonathan Stonestreet, joined the Carter Center in 2014 as Associate Director of the Democracy Program. He now manages the Carter Center program in Myanmar and has worked on projects in Nepal, Mauritania, and the Philippines. Previously, Mr. Stonestreet served as a senior election advisor with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and worked as a consultant in election monitoring. In all, he has participated in more than 24 election observation missions. Mr. Stonestreet earned his bachelor's degree from the College of William and Mary, Williamsburg, Virginia, and his master's in international humanitarian assistance from Deusto University in Bilbao, Spain. Jonathan?
Thank you so much, Mary. I appreciate the kind introduction. And before I start, I just wanted to say that how proud I am, but also humbled. I don't know if that's possible to be. There's two things at the same time, but I am to have to work alongside colleagues like Adam, Michael, and Kashif, and the incredible work that they're doing. So, good morning. It is a real pleasure for me to be here today to speak with you. I'm going to give you a short presentation on our recent election expert mission for the May 9 general elections in the Philippines. The Philippines election, okay. The Philippines election, especially the presidential election, was a portrait of a democracy at a crossroads. After 6 years of the populist style of President Duterte, would Filipinos choose a presumed return to liberal democracy, symbolized by Vice President Leni Robredo? Or would they choose the symbol of an autocratic past, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, the son of the former dictator? And I'll give you a spoiler alert, they chose the latter by a large margin. As a crossroads, this was also the story of an intersection of weakly regulated money in politics, economic frustration, COVID-19 frustration, and disinformation on social media. And maybe some of that will sound uncomfortably familiar to some of us in the US. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on the Philippines and a previous Carter Center engagement. So the Philippines is regionally important. It's a Southeast Asian country bordering the South China Sea of strategic importance to the US. The Philippines has been a functioning democracy since the People Power Revolution in 1988 deposed Ferdinand Marcos. And since then, there have been democratic, albeit imperfect, elections. Citizen participation as observers and poll watchers has long been a hallmark of elections in the Philippines, and large citizen observer networks even partner with the Election Commission to provide parallel vote tabulation and other transparency measures. In the early 2000s, delays in announcing results and allegations of fraud during counting led to a decision to introduce an automated counting and result transmission system called the Automated Election System. Then the Carter Center observed the introduction of this system in the 2012 presidential election. The center returned to the Philippines with a limited mission in 2016 that focused on election violence on the island of Mindanao in the south. And Rodrigo Duterte won that election, ushering in 6 years of an infamous war on drugs that saw thousands killed, and a crackdown on independent media and weakened rule of law. But he's also very popular throughout his mandate. So what was at stake at these elections? These were general elections for the president and vice president who served 6-year terms, the House of Representatives, and half the Senate, and then thousands of local and provincial posts. Some of the key dynamics. Mr. Marcos has been working for years to rehabilitate his family, essentially since they lost power. He's been a governor, a senator, and he ran for vice president in 2016, losing narrowly to Ms. Robredo. Part of the effort of rehabilitation was a massive, long-term, and very well-funded social media disinformation campaign that portrayed the Marcos era very positively and attacked opponents relentlessly, and particularly Robredo, but also mainstream media. A study by the independent media organization Rappler, run by Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa, found that there are similarities between disinformation techniques practiced in the Philippines and the fire hose of falsehood Russian propaganda model. Finally, another key factor in this election is the influence of money, largely unregulated, in allowing candidates to run extensive and nearly permanent electoral campaigns. So this was the third Carter Center election mission to the Philippines, building on our missions in 2012 and 2016. As an expert mission, it was not comprehensive. We did not try to assess the overall election process as we do with a full observation mission. Instead, we focused on political finance and the use of the automated election system, with the goal of making targeted recommendations for future reform in the election process. An additional benefit of our mission for us was that the assessment of the automated election system will feed into our upcoming updated handbook on observing voting technologies. The team deployed at the end of April for about 2 weeks. 5 team members were based in Manila, led by a former chief executive of the United Kingdom's Electoral Commission, and 1 expert supported the team remotely. The experts met with the Election Commission, the vendor of the automated system, civil society groups, media, parliamentary representatives, audit and other official institutions, and others. On Election Day, we visited some 25 to 30 polling stations in Manila, as well as sites for repairing and distributing the machines, the results tabulation center. And this gave us an understanding of how the process worked. We're not able to assess the entire Election Day process off of such a few number of visits, but it did give us insight into how things really work on the ground and some of the problems that arise on Election Day. So what did we find? We found really vibrant participation. That is, in the pre-election period and in campaigning, there was a lot of activity. Media and social media coverage of the elections was everywhere. There was the extensive presence and participation of citizens as observers and poll watchers, and voter turnout, importantly, was around 80%. So people were very interested in the elections and very interested in participating. Some voters waited hours to cast their ballots, and for example, we interviewed a woman who was waiting to vote, and she told us that she'd been in line for over 4 hours. There were also issues of secrecy of the vote, which was tenuous at best. And then in the automated vote counting system, which does include safeguards against manipulation of the results, but it did not always function well in practice. There were many machine breakdowns reported, which we also observed, and machines needing repair caused long delays for some voters. Despite these problems, the preliminary results were reported quickly and showed a landslide victory for Marcos, who won with nearly 60% of the vote. So the automated election system worked well enough to get preliminary results quickly, and there were several important transparency measures and checks on its accuracy and integrity, including a manual audit process. However, the problems that it had, as well as the frustration of Marcos' opponents, led to claims that the results were fraudulent. These claims did not gain much traction, and they've been refuted by independent media as well as the Election Commission. But it's worth noting that a close election could have put enormous strain on the credibility of the process and the acceptance of the results. Our final report will have recommendations focused on the areas of political finance and the automated election system, with the goal of strengthening the process for future elections. First, we hope to level the playing field. And second, we want to help the Philippine authorities and civil society to build confidence in the results and improve protection of fundamental election rights, such as secrecy of the vote. To conclude, I want to step back and take a look at a bigger picture. The wide victory of Marcos was surprising for many, both in the Philippines and abroad. But it may also fit a pattern of bitterly divided societies in countries around the world, with large segments of the population opting for extreme or for non-traditional candidates and parties. Some of the factors driving voters in that direction also fit a wider pattern, including social media manipulation, the influence of underregulated money in tilting the playing field, and non-acceptance of unfavorable results. The Philippines managed to avoid a crisis of electoral confidence in this election, and this is primarily due to the large margin of victory. But the successful election process also perhaps masked a larger crisis of democracy in the Philippines and in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. All right, our next speaker. Michael Johnson joined the Carter Center in 2021 as a senior program associate in the Conflict Resolution Program. Previously, Mr. Johnson worked as an international development consultant and was a political affairs officer with the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Mali. He's worked with the United Nations Development Program, the United States Agency for International Development, the World Bank Group, and other international organizations. Mr. Johnson earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Colorado, Denver, and his master's degree in international affairs from American University. Michael?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am humbled to have this opportunity to speak with all of you present here in the room and those joining us virtually. And I do want to echo Jonathan's sentiments as well. It is such an honor and pleasure to work with such esteemed colleagues across the Carter Center who are doing just incredible work, as all of you are seeing now. Let's talk about Mali. Let's try and deconstruct this extremely complex environment that the Carter Center is so privileged to work in. The Carter Center is the independent observer of the implementation of the Agreement on Peace and Reconciliation in Mali. The agreement was signed in 2015 between government and rebel movements from northern Mali who were upset by the persistent government neglect of the needs of the people of northern Mali. Since the signing of the agreement, armed hostilities between the government and rebel movements have largely ceased, although there have been occasional flare-ups, but progress has been made by addressing low-hanging fruit in the post-signature years, but implementation is now facing some increasing difficulties and delays due to some of the most intractable issues that the Malian parties must now face. Article 63 of this agreement provides for the appointment of an independent observer. Our job as the independent to objectively assess the status of implementation, publish regular reports on the implementations of the parties' commitments, identify bottlenecks, and make recommendations on steps to be taken to overcome these obstacles. The Carter Center was designated as the role of the independent observer by the Agreement's Monitoring Committee, which comprises all of the parties to the conflict, in 2017, and we began our mandate officially in 2018. The implementation process has become increasingly difficult since two successive coups d'etats in 2020 and 2021. Other socio-political and security crises, including terrorism in central and northern regions, as well as intercommunal conflicts in the central region, but increasingly elsewhere, have further complicated implementation. The Carter Center was chosen due to its long-standing support to peace and development in Mali, its perceived independence, neutrality, impartiality, and acquired trust gained amongst the parties. Since 2018 to the present, all UN Security Council resolutions concerning the renewal of the mandate of the UN peacekeeping operation in Mali contain a clause, a section about the necessity for all actors within the international community to continue to support the independent observer and the work of the Carter Center. This instruction by the UN Security Council is a first in the context of UN mandate renewals, particularly in peace processes generally and globally. These efforts signal how the independent observer remains a key pillar in the peace process, and parties have come to rely on the stature of the Carter Center and its independent posture to assist them in breaking bottlenecks and advancing implementation of the agreement. This is evident by two recent key actions by the independent observer. The first was the organization of a seminar in February 2022 that brought together over 90 key stakeholders involved in implementation of the agreement, the first of its kind ever for the independent observer and the Carter Center in Mali. The second was the May 2022 visit by the Carter Center Chairman of the Board of Trustees, Jason Carter, and C.D. Glenn, who is also a key board member and representing private sector interests, to Mali, where they met with interim President Assimi Goïta. This is the first time that an international non-governmental organization operating in Mali has met this rather elusive figure in the transitional government. And we are proud to say that since its inception in 2018, the Independent Observer has received 100% financial support from the international community. So no Carter Center resources are being devoted. We've received 100% donor support. So, some of the key challenges that we're operating under: number one, the transition. The transitional government following the latest coup in May of 2021 enjoys little international support. And that has raised serious doubts over the sincerity and the transparency of Malian transitional government policies. Support has eroded due to delays from the government in developing and adhering to a viable electoral calendar and process that would return Mali to constitutional order. As a result of these delays, sanctions were applied on Mali in January of this year by the West African Regional and Political Bloc, ECOWAS, as well as the European Union. There is a lack of an enforcement mechanism in this agreement. What that means is that there is a key structural deficit in how the parties are being monitored in raising their commitments that they have made and signed on to by signing this peace agreement. There's no definitive way to hold the parties accountable for their lack of fulfillment of commitments. This flaw in the structure of the agreement has in large measure permitted the slow pace of implementation that we're witnessing today and has prevented for momentum in other key areas. Moreover, during recent meetings between ourselves and certain members of the international community, the issue of a rise of dis and misinformation on social media and other outlets around the agreement has concerned many stakeholders around the world. The Independent Observer has started a research project into this phenomenon, and we will be releasing and disseminating our key findings in the coming weeks. There's also a growing anti-Western sentiment. Since the use and rise of propaganda and trolls, anti-Western sentiment is gaining traction, particularly online and within written Malian press. The primary sentiment being expressed here is that since the presence of foreign forces in Mali going back to 2013 when the French commenced their Operation Serval, nothing has really improved. There's not been a drastic improvement in the security environment. And in fact, many analysts would agree that the security environment has gotten worse in recent years. In addition, the ECOWAS sanctions that I mentioned a bit ago against Mali have added to this anti-Western sentiment, as many Malians perceive the regional bloc as an incumbent president's club, unwilling to acknowledge the strength of popular support for military leaders that are promising much-needed reforms. The result of these challenges that I've mentioned, coupled with Mali's increasing global isolation, could have implications on the kind of financial support that the independent observer receives moving forward. Although, as I've mentioned, the independent observer has received this much-needed financial support since its inception, the present relationship between Mali and the international community, coupled with the persistent pace, the slow pace of implementation of this agreement, has generated fatigue among many donors, meaning that there is a risk that the independent observer could become a casualty of the present geopolitical and security dynamics in Mali and across the Sahel, and struggle to receive the support it needs going forward to perform its mandate. Our regular engagement with donors is designed to continue dialogue about the issues and to keep focus on the continued validity and viability of the agreement, and thus the valuable role that we play in that entire process. We are very fortunate to have the trust and the credibility among all of these various stakeholders in the implementation process. That was evident during the February 2022 seminar organized by us on our observations and recommendations as illuminated in our various reports. This allowed space for 90 key stakeholders involved in implementation to discuss the challenges on key issues and topics and develop together ways to surmount them and to advance implementation. As I mentioned, the independent observer is a trusted, credible advisor to the entire peace process. Because of our independence, the Carter Center is able to meet with all key stakeholders involved in implementation of the agreement, separately as well as together. And this is unique because many of these stakeholders, there's such mistrust amongst all of them that they rarely come together in such a fora to meet together. Many of them choose to meet within their own key constituencies. To date, the independent observer has produced 9 official reports. We're in the process as we speak to roll out our 10th report, and have produced topical papers, strategic documentation that's focused on a range of issues. Many of these are available on our website. These documents are regularly referenced by the international community and the parties to the agreement as the go-to documents. And that is very important because it allows members of the international community to know exactly what's going on in this peace process. These documents have helped to guide the parties in the implementation process, as well as to make clearly known the commitments made by them for greater accountability by the international community and the parties. This credibility built has allowed the independent observer to play a key catalyst and supporter to the international mediation efforts led by Algeria. They provide the structural mechanisms required to guarantee the implementation of the agreement. Outside of the official monitoring bodies, the independent observer is able to supplement the official dialogue process that takes place under the auspices of Algeria in the international mediation through seminars and various other forums, which will continue into the new fiscal year coming up. There have been a lot of key lessons learned. I don't want to go into all of them in the interest of time, but I do want to point out that the Carter Center is well positioned to offer its expertise in observing peace and reconciliation agreements, not just in Mali, but to model the position that we've been able to acquire to other conflict zones in Africa and beyond. The key to the Carter Center's success in Mali as the independent observer has been the trust it has amongst the parties to the conflict, subsequently parties to the agreement, and the global reputation of President Carter and Mrs. Carter as peacemakers that translates into the critical work that the Carter Center performs on a daily basis in Mali. Now, this is a regional crisis. So as a result, we have our special advisor on Mali, the former Ambassador Bisa Williams, who also served in the State Department as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, traveling around the region, meeting with various key stakeholders to ensure that all actors and regional stakeholders are politically and developmentally engaged in the implementation of this peace agreement. For example, Ambassador Williams' recent visits to Algeria and Mauritania sought not only to rally regional support for continued peace efforts within the international mediation, but also to galvanize support for the work of the independent observer. What are some key next steps for us? The independent observer continues to engage stakeholders bilaterally and multilaterally to observe official proceedings of the various monitoring organs of the agreement. The independent observer participated in the May 10th meeting of the international mediation, where, amongst other important topics, the independent observer briefed the group on the May 4th and 5th Jason Carter C.D. Glenn visit to Mali and their meetings with interim President Goita. We meet regularly with all key stakeholders involved in the implementation process and to encourage follow-up action. The February 2022 seminar with the key signatory parties demonstrated two key points. The first is that the independent observer has the ability to gather relevant stakeholders involved in implementation of the agreement who normally have very little interaction amongst themselves, as I mentioned a bit ago. But the second point is that the independent observer is seen by the signatory parties and members of the international community as a neutral, impartial mechanism to promote dialogue on various topics designed to keep forward momentum in the peace process. More such seminar-type events are planned for the upcoming new fiscal year. And finally, we are pleased that we're going to be bringing on board a national communications officer under the independent observer. This national communications officer will have a vast role to play in increasing our public outreach efforts to the Malian public to further sensitize them not only to the work of the independent observer, but also the mechanisms of the peace agreement itself. So we are very much looking forward to welcoming this new staff member on board. Vraiment, je vous remercie pour votre attention, and I thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Dr. Kashif Ejah joined the Carter Center in 2020 as Vice President for Health Programs. Previously, Dr. Ejah served as Principal Deputy Director in the Division of Global Health Protection at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. His division worked on building disease detection and response capacity for health security, including humanitarian assistance for refugees and internally displaced populations. He joined the CDC in 2002, and during his tenure served as Deputy Director for Science and Programs in the Center for Global Health and as Chief of the Tuberculosis Field Services and Evaluation Branch in the National Center for HIV, STD, and TB Prevention. He helped lead the CDC's responses to the West Africa Ebola epidemic that began in 2014, the MERS COVID outbreak of 2013, and the H1N1 pandemic of 2009. He has worked extensively in Asia, Africa, and across the developing world on malaria, tuberculosis, and other diseases. Dr. Ijah began his career as a medical epidemiologist at the Arkansas Department of Health and as a research assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. He earned his medical degree from the University of the Punjab and his Master of Public Health from the University of Oklahoma. Kashif.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mary, for a nice introduction. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here and to actually be live and among some live audience over here, and for those of you who are actually online and watching this Board of Councilors meeting virtually. So what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to talk about the International Task Force for Disease Eradication, what it actually is, why is it important? Why is the work of this task force important? And what is the Carter Center's role? And what did we discuss recently during our most recent meeting? And then what are we going to be discussing and what's the future for this task force as we continue to develop? Okay, so the International Task Force for Disease Eradication, or ITFDE, was inspired by the successful eradication of smallpox in 1977. The ITFDE was formed at the Carter Center in 1988 to evaluate disease control and prevention and the potential for eradicating other infectious diseases. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. So, and then the ITFDE is made up of well-respected public health leaders from a variety of institutions, including universities, governmental organizations, as well as non-governmental organizations, and the foundations, among others. It basically convenes 1 to 2 times annually at the Carter Center, and then the proceedings are published in the WHO weekly epidemiological records. So as we review and make recommendations for diseases that can be eradicated, it's important to understand what eradication means. Eradication means that the disease no longer exists and the pathogen has been reduced to zero. A disease that has been eradicated can no longer be found in humans or animals. When a disease is eradicated, human and monetary resources never need to be allocated to it again. So this is a great public health achievement and a benefit to the society. In addition to disease eradication, the ITFDE also reviews the diseases that might be eliminable. Elimination means that the transmission is halted in a limited geographic area. And then we also look at the diseases that need to be controlled, which basically means that there is a reduction in the incidence or prevalence of the disease. So this is all done based on the criteria of scientific feasibility and political support. And currently there are 8 diseases which have been determined by the International Task Force for Disease Eradication that can be eradicated. So these diseases are actually listed over here, which is guinea worm, which is what the Carter Center works on, and you just heard from Adam earlier today. And then polio, mumps, rubella, lymphatic filariasis, that's another disease that the Carter Center works on, cysticercosis, measles, and yaws. This is determined based on epidemiologic vulnerability, availability of an effective and practical intervention, and demonstrated feasibility of elimination. A number of non-scientific factors play a role too, including the expected cost of eradication, the alignment of eradication efforts with intervention for other diseases, the necessity for eradication rather than control, and countries' interest in prioritizing the disease for eradication, and then donors and partners' willingness for a long-term commitment. As we have seen, and as was described by Adam, we started to do the work on guinea worm eradication back in the 80s. So it requires a long-term commitment, dedicated financial and human resources, and most importantly, international collaboration, but most importantly, by the collaboration and support from donors and our partners, which is really very, very important. So what is Carter Center's role? As a recognized leader in elimination and eradication of neglected tropical diseases for more than 35 years, the center sponsors and hosts the ITFDE meetings. With its international reputation for cutting-edge work and measurable results, the center has the power to convene the influential members of the group. In addition, several diseases which I mentioned and were discussed or have been discussed by ITFDE for eradication or better control intersect with the center's programming. For instance, guinea worm disease, lymphatic filariasis, schistosomiasis, river blindness, trachoma, and malaria. So since 2001, the ITFDE has actually had 33 meetings with disease experts to review progress on disease eradication, elimination, and control, and make recommendations for future actions. So we have basically reviewed more than 20 diseases, and the Hispaniola initiative, which I will describe briefly, to eliminate malaria and lymphatic filariasis from Haiti and Dominican Republic, is an example of how the work of ITFDE feeds into the Carter Center's programming and can also help to advance the innovative projects. And it, most importantly, can help the people of these countries and also have an impact globally. So in terms of the Hispaniola project, in 2006, the ITFDE concluded that elimination of malaria and lymphatic filariasis from Hispaniola, which includes Dominican Republic and Haiti, which is the only endemic island remaining in the Caribbean for both these diseases, is technically feasible, medically desirable, and would be economically beneficial. President Carter and staff from the Carter Center visited the countries in 2009 to meet with the respective heads of state, ministers of health, partner organizations, and donor representatives. During the visit, the two ministries of health announced a binational plan to eliminate malaria from the entire island by 2020. While this goal has not been met yet, the Carter Center, in collaboration with the ministries of health in the Dominican Republic and Haiti and other partners, have made substantial gains. For example, there were about 140 communes which actually had lymphatic filariasis. And now 86% of those communes and the people living in those communes are no longer at risk for lymphatic filariasis. Similarly, when we started to work in Dominican Republic, there were more than 250,000 people who were at risk for lymphatic filariasis in about 19 endemic districts over there. And today, there are 0 people who are at risk for lymphatic filariasis in Dominican Republic. And we are actually, doing our post-treatment surveillance, which is to make sure that before they submit a document to WHO PAHO for validation of elimination of lymphatic filariasis. That's where we are right now. So that's a big, huge achievement, that there will be no more lymphatic filariasis in Dominican Republic very soon. So moving on. So what is next for? So what is next for the International Task Force for Disease Eradication? So the recent meeting, which was the 33rd meeting for the ITFDE, which we actually concluded in March of this year, we talked about tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is one of the diseases which is a passion of interest of mine, as you could tell from my bio. That's where I worked for a long time. But at the same point in time, that is actually the #1 global infectious disease that affects everybody. And it kills the most number of people still to date, and it's just surpassed by COVID-19. And this is a disease that can actually, be treated. We know how to treat it, we know how to diagnose it, and yet it is still the #1 global infectious disease, actually now #2 because of COVID-19 in terms of mortality. So we talked about, the International Task Force for Disease Eradication talked about ending TB. And this is the last time the task force discussed about TB was in 2010. And this meeting was to see that since 2010, what gains have been made and what still needs to be done. And this was also following up on the 2018 UN General Assembly meeting and commitment from the governments to end TB. So we actually had that meeting and convened it in March, a week before the World TB Day, which is on March 24th. And we actually had leaders, and this is a closed meeting. These meetings are usually closed meetings. And we actually had experts from all over the world, which included WHO, the Stop TB Partnership, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Emory University, and they basically reviewed the progress that had been made for TB or ending TB, and still there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has actually impacted it. And the report is going to be published very soon in the WHO Weekly Epidemiological Records. And then there's also a renewed commitment and a plan which is going to be for the next UN General Assembly coming next year by a UN high-level meeting, where they will be talking about what still needs to be done for ending TB. So this is the kind of work that the International Task Force for Disease Eradication continues to highlight and basically push forward. And this task force, which I should have mentioned in the very beginning, is actually a WHO-recognized task force. So WHO basically looks up to the task force in terms of what are the diseases for eradication that needs to be put on the docket, what are the diseases for elimination and control. So the upcoming fall 2022 meeting will focus on progress on schistosomiasis, which is another tropical disease that the Carter Center works on. And we are actually trying to expand our work on schistosomiasis globally as well. And in spring 2023 meeting, we will also focus on a strategic planning for this International Task Force for Disease Eradication. Because with all the shifts in the global landscape over the last few years, we feel it is important to develop strategies to ensure the continued greater impact from the work of this task force as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kashif Azaz. Paige Alexander joined the Carter Center as Chief Executive Officer in June 2020, continuing a distinguished global development career with over 2 decades of experience spanning the government and nonprofit sectors. She held senior leadership positions at the United States Agency for International Development during 2 presidential administrations. In her highest role with USAID, she led the Middle East and North African Bureau, overseeing 1,000 employees, programs in 12 countries, and a budget of more than $1.4 billion. Between her assignments with USAID, Ms. Alexander was Senior Vice President and European Founder President of IREX, an international civil society, democracy, and education nonprofit. Before her appointment to the Carter Center, she served as Executive Director of the European Cooperative for Rural Development in Brussels and Amsterdam, working to improve livelihoods of farmers, families, and communities in Africa. Paige?
Thanks, Mary. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for joining us on video as well. I will say that after spending 2 years looking at everybody on 2-inch screens and getting the briefings from my amazing colleagues, it sinks in more when we're actually in person. So I think that in particular, on each of your presentations, one of the things you heard is Adam talking about the fact that our ability to listen to people on the ground is what was the differentiating factor for us to continue during COVID. Adam oversees a couple of thousand people. Our biggest office is in Chad and Ethiopia. These guinea worm warriors are listening. They're on the ground. They were in their own bubble during COVID. And so they didn't need the Atlanta headquarters coming in and telling them what needed to be done. They were doing it on their own. And the fact that we were then able to elevate it during the Guinea Worm Summit by bringing all of those countries and the ministries of health together to sign on to ensure that we actually do fight the last worm was really remarkable. But that's sort of the linear span of everything that happens in the guinea worm program. And Jonathan's work on the Philippines is also interesting. We talk about Ukraine a lot. It's in the news all the time. That's a country with a little over 40 million people. Philippines has 110 million people. People aren't talking about it, but where goes the Philippines? Often you will see elections go in other places. And so the fact that we had seen disinformation and all of the things that often make us uncomfortable about the elections we're reading about in our own country, you see that happening elsewhere. And so we're learning lessons from that. We're able to peel back that for the electronic voting system and look at how those are relevant even domestically, because as I talked to President Carter right after I came and said, I don't think we can be international if we're not looking in our own backyard. And he agreed. And so it's the work that people like Jonathan and the folks in the democracy program are doing. And Michael, when I started here at the Carter Center, my concern had been, what happens when President and Mrs. Carter are no longer the go-to people? Well, I think that Molly in particular shows exactly what happens. Our center expertise really is able to step up in a way that we are respected without having President Carter's voice or being on the ground. We have our own expertise, and being able to bring in people like Michael to the Carter Center has been really helpful for us. And so that has been a particular excitement for me to see how well respected we are. And Kashif is often joking with me and saying, have you read the Lancet article? Well, I don't think a lot of us read Lancet if you're not an epidemiologist or a medical professional. But the work that we're doing in ITFTE, the fact that we are able to look at these particular diseases and that we at the Carter Center are seen as the eradication and elimination organization is really important, because we take a very senior role in pushing some of those portfolios and those agenda items. So I'll say that this to me is often like a master class listening to my colleagues, so I am incredibly honored to hear them and to be able to learn from them every day. And that is what the Board of Councilors is for us. This is an outreach for us to the business community. It's an outreach for us to make sure that here in Atlanta, in your backyard, this global work is being done by these excellent colleagues who have had worldwide experience, yet they're here in Atlanta doing this work. And so our attempt to make sure that in our hometown that here at the Carter Center, this expertise exists. We're happy to answer questions. We're happy to get involved. We're happy to be part of your corporate social responsibility. There's no financial requirement. As Michael was saying, even our Molly program is 100% paid for. The rest of them are not, I will tell you, but so Michael said that very proudly. But this just gives you an indication of where the Carter Center sits in the global play on both disease eradication and on peace building. And so we're happy to have you join us as Board of Councilors members, to be bringing friends. Thank you for folks who came today as well, to have a better sense of what is happening here in Atlanta and at our organization. So I think with that, I am happy to take questions that people have, or defer the questions to my colleagues. If you would like to ask a question, there's some microphones set up. I would encourage you, both here and there, to come to the microphone, introduce yourself, and ask your question. And if we don't have any of those, please, can I ask you to jump up to the mic? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Grace Malco. I'm not a Board of Councilor or anything. I'm here with my dad. My question was for the elections in the Philippines, and there was talk of sort of leveling the playing field. So what strategies is the Carter Center sort of using to level the playing field, per se?
All yours, Jonathan.
Wow, great question. Maybe you should be a member of the Board of Councilors. That's really good. We've been thinking about that. It's a very broad question. One of the key factors, and something that I think that in the democracy field we haven't looked at quite closely enough, is the role of money. And that's why we wanted to look at that in this election. There's a clear path. If you have a disinformation campaign, if you have vote buying, even if you have outsized imbalanced media influence, that's all because that there's money coming into the process that's not regulated. And I think that's something that we need to look at. Specifically in the Philippines, of course, it's going to be up to the people in the Philippines if they want to engage with us. Our report will be coming out fairly soon with recommendations, and then will they want to take that up and address some of the recommendations that will go towards tightening the use of money in the process, even such things as just checking on it. Right now there is a reporting system, but candidates simply just tell the Election Commission how much money they spent, and as long as it's under the limit, what they say, that's okay, and everyone's happy. Candidates can also keep extra money for themselves and do whatever they want with it, buying houses, for example. So these are things that should be that the authority should consider, and that it's a very difficult thing because you're asking the very people who benefit from the influence of money in politics to take action against it, but it can be done. So I'm hoping that's one way that we can level the playing field. And of course, there are other things that need to be done in other countries to make political participation for all citizens take place on an equal basis, and not giving some people essentially more rights to who the leaders are, what the political direction is, than other folks.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the question. Laura.
Good morning. On the fire hose of disinformation, Freedom House does an annual report called Freedom on the Net, 65 countries they track over the past 15 years for government manipulation of information and journalism, and the increasing rise of social media subversion of democracy. I'm interested where you think that might go, where alliances between Carter Center and groups like the Freedom on the Net studies, what directions you see as possible.
Thank you. So the impact clearly on that, we've seen the impact of social media on elections, and we kind of first woke up to it in 2016. But as Paige mentioned before, that had already happened in 2016 in the Philippines, and we weren't really aware of it, not to a large extent. But it's something that's evolving, and the tactics are changing. There's new ways to spread disinformation, or perhaps it's just sometimes propaganda. It's opinion, but using that in a massive way to change people's views. I think that there's a lot of there's a needed scope for cooperation among different groups that are working on this. A lot of it is going to require platforms, social media platforms, to take action, and we are looking at, for instance, at ways of my colleagues in the democracy program of identifying the worst offenders for spreading disinformation, find out who is advertising on sites that spread information, and trying to cut off the flow of advertising funding that supports the disinformation. My feeling is that even if strategies like that are successful, there will be other channels identified. This is a longer term problem, and I don't think that we have a good grip on how to deal with it. But I'm going to go back to my first answer and say, looking at the money path is going to be, in my view, a key way of affecting outcomes. We also don't want to eliminate, or not eliminate, we don't want to impinge on freedom of speech. There's legitimate speech that people can make, and some of it is actually the right to say untrue things. So that's also a careful balance that we have to strike.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just jump in to say a couple of things. Freedom House is actually a partner of ours in a number of places. And if you've been to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights and you go up to the top floor, you can see the Freedom of the World map that they have. The Freedom of the Net is something that if you look on our website, you'll see the repeat offenders report that we did on big tech companies who are putting things out online. We have predictive modeling going on and looking at Michael Baldessaro had done Michael Schultens had done a Board of Councilors discussion talking about some of the blots that we do and what we are following. And as I joked with President Carter, I talked about bots one time. He's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So these are areas that we're looking into right now. Also, the State Department just put out a paper on signing on to gender, to looked at that in Tanzania a couple of years ago about women candidates who are running and what they had suffered online with the harassment and the violence. And that is a place that we are going to sort of peel back the onion a little bit and figure out if there's a space for us to get involved there. But you can see foreshadowing happens online. You can see January 6th, we could see online before it happened. And it was the most known issue that was that happened in the United States, yet we weren't able to connect the people who were looking at the screens and seeing it with the people on the ground. And so that's one of the areas that I think is really important for us to be looking at, is to look at these predictive models and say, this could be a problem. And then how do we address it through a policy angle, through implementation? So these are the areas that we're looking at, and we can't do it on our own. So Freedom House is a perfect example of an organization that we spend time with talking about these issues. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kate Thompson, and I'm a guest here of Joel Cowan's, and delighted to be here, and thank you so much for this really rich discussion. I'm curious, Paige, you talked about potentially doing more work in the United States, and I'm curious to know what kinds of programs you're thinking about, what's sort of top on the priority list.
Thank you. So when I came here, again, I've done international development my whole life, so the idea that I was suddenly going to be running an organization that had domestic programming was a bit new to me and to my colleagues. And so we don't want to go on tilt on the domestic side, but we are seeing a lot of similarities to what we've seen in 113 elections in 39 countries overseas. So we need to be able to look at, much like we're doing in Mali, conflict resolution. How do you bring people together? How do we do that in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, in Central Florida, in North Carolina? So we're doing conflict resolution programs there, just as we're doing in Northern Mali. We're doing the same thing on election integrity work, trying to figure out how not voter rights and not registering people to vote, But how do you bring back the integrity of the election? How do you make sure that people know they're not going to get the results the next day? Like all of us have been programmed that the polls close at 7 and you're going to know the results at 8. It doesn't necessarily happen that way anymore. There are a lot more people voting. There are a lot of different systems. There's a lot of training that goes in. Georgia's got 159 counties. Texas is the only state that has more counties than that. Within each county, the number of precincts is several dozens, if not hundreds. That's 159 different elections in Georgia itself that have 159 different rules between Fulton, DeKalb, and Fannin County. When the polls are going to be open, early voting, how long that takes. So that educational aspect of it is incredibly important. And so that's another area that we will be pushing on. We also have mental health issues going on. You have election administrators who have had threats against them, who literally just break down when they start talking about the work that they're doing. They're not getting paid a lot of money. And so we are looking at our mental health program and how that actually can be useful for the people who are just trying to carry out their job. I'm sure I'm leaving something else out. Democracy, mental health, CRP. Anything else? No. So those are the domestic work, not to mention the mental health work that we've been doing here in Georgia. The parity legislation that just passed, we're very proud of. School-based behavioral health. And when I talk about parity, I'm talking about if I break my leg, I actually can get my insurance company to cover it. If I have a mental health issue, insurance wasn't covering it. And so that is an important, and it puts Georgia first and foremost in the country in the parity piece, which is essentially following federal law, but now it's a state law as well. One of the concerns, of course, is you have to have medical insurance for that to work. So, but that's another issue, and I'm sure there are other organizations that are working on that. But we are trying to look at destigmatizing mental health, and I think during COVID, we've all seen how everyone has suffered, and making sure that there's school-based behavioral health programs as well. Yep.
Gopidat Govidraj from Woodstock Lions Club. My question is the Carter Center working with the social media companies to fight election misinformation in our own backyard?
We do work as much as we can with social media platforms. Some are more cooperative than others. Facebook, we've seen in some countries, is been responsive. For instance, in Myanmar in the 2020 elections, they were widely criticized for the genocide against Rohingya people in Western Myanmar and allowing hate speech to proliferate on their platform. And they did take action, and we saw that in the 2020 elections. There are other companies who have a more radical view of free speech or a different business model that are very reluctant to take down hate speech. And so you see people migrating from Facebook to other platforms when they're taken down or feel pressured off of Facebook. And so they reach maybe fewer people in some countries, but they are able to build up their influence networks. And very often these platforms, it's very difficult to get them to take action, especially if they're not based in the United States, if they're not United States or European companies. It's much more difficult, and this could be a growing problem in future elections if these platforms are becoming more popular.
And go ahead, Michael.
Can I say, I want to address your question in the case of Mali, that certainly Facebook is a very popular way that Malians communicate in the social media space, but increasingly what we're seeing is the use of telephone networks, Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, to spread dis and misinformation. And so our research project that I mentioned in my presentation is going to dive into ways and offer suggestions and recommendations on how we within the Mali Peace programs might be able to address how that information is spreading on mobile networks. But it's definitely something that we are tracking within our program and are looking to address as we move forward. So.
Great. I think I want to be cognizant of time and respect the fact everyone comes in early on a Friday morning, which we're very appreciative of. Not as early as we used to come in. But so thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us online. And let me hand this back over to you, Mary. Thanks.
Thank you, Paige, and thank you to our amazing panel this morning. Before I close, I want to remind you of 2 items. I look forward to seeing you at the next annual meeting of the Board of Councilors, our 35th anniversary. It's on Friday, September 16th. And remember that the Board of Councilors asks only 2 things of its members: that we attend meetings and that we proactively support the center in those circles in which we have influence. So tell someone today about the important work going on at the Carter Center. Thank you all, and have a great day and a great weekend. It is. Thank you. Important to have those visuals early in the morning too, for people to.
Busy Friday for you, I imagine?
Yes, it is actually. It's I'm headed to the office right now, and it'll be a full day.
Yeah.
How about you?
We have budget meetings.
Oh, fun.
With Jason and the finance committee.
Okay.
So this was my wake up to.
Right.
To that.
Now go deal with the numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good luck.
Well, thank you so much.